It's carnage. They're almost making the Glazers look good in terms of Jim Ratcliffe, the Jim Reaper.
What Ratcliffe is doing is quite unusual. Most people that come into the sport overspend and they start going crazy with the checkbook. This is the opposite, but this is a business strategy where they say, we have become a flabby organisation and we need to get back to basics.
But they need to start with the dressing room.
From a commercial perspective, this is not geared up to spend huge amounts of money on the first team squad. They are right on the edge of PSR.
You're going to make staff at Carrington feel like second-class citizens. Football clubs are so much about morale, and if you can't put a price on having a good morale.
English football is exciting. What's happened in the US with Lasso has opened this window to people. And then when people start complaining about the money, what they're really complaining about is that we're better at business than them.
Hello, welcome to How Football Works. I'm joined this week by the award-winning football journalist Henry Winter and the former financial advisor to Manchester City and legal expert Stefan Borson. Gentlemen, welcome along to you. Let's start where we usually begin our shows, at Old Trafford. And there is a lot going on. Up to 200 more job cuts were announced to the club yesterday. That's on top of the 250 that were culled in the summer. It means over a third of the workforce has been cut since INEOS took control. But in what was described as a transformational plan, it doesn't stop there. Free staff lunches at Old Trafford, gone and replaced by fruit. And at Carrington, only players will get a free lunch choice. It's soup and sandwiches for everyone else. Henry Winter, I'll start with you. From a PR perspective, this seems like an absolute shambles once again for Manchester United.
It's carnage. And I mean, they're almost making the Glazers look good in terms of Jim Ratcliffe, the Jim Reaper, as some of the fans are calling him. I mean, redundancies at an emotional institution like Manchester United are never going to be easy. And when you've got one or two of the pretty important people in-house being laid off, who are actually staying on and helping out, because the club basically can't survive without them, organising things, really important events, then look, I guess there's no easy PR with this. But I think if you are, this is not like INEOS and Sir Jim Ratcliffe dealing with a petrochemical refinery. This is not just employment for these, it's going to be 450 people. It's an emotional stake for them in the club, and they're losing that. The club that they love is turning its back on them. So I think they could have done it with a little bit more dignity. But I guess that's the business world. And actually, you just listed the fact that the players are going to get the free lunch. The players are part of the problem here. The amount of money, and Stefan can take us through the figures and explain them far more eloquently and intelligently than I can. But the actual numbers that it looks like they're going to save with these cutbacks, and also the hike in ticket prices as well. Let's not forget that. If maybe they'd spent a little bit more judiciously on Rasmus Højlund, they probably paid 20 million over the odds for him. If they, Anthony, they probably paid 30 million over the odds for him. That's 50 million pounds, which will probably have covered a lot of the damage that has been done. But let's not forget, in the background, the Glazers. And I'm bored saying this. I've been saying this since 2005, since they went into the Football Association and effectively hoodwinked the supposed governors of the game that they would be conscientious guardians of this great football institution, Manchester United. And now, how much have they taken out? You'll tell me it's about £1 billion.
Close to £1 billion,
yeah. That is outrageous.
Mm. We'll come on to the Glazers in a bit more detail a bit later on, because I really do want to explore that. But Stefan, as usual, you've done your homework excellently before the show. We talked about these marginal gains, as Dave Brailsford would probably put it, in these cuts that INEOS are making, which from a PR perspective look ridiculous. But how much are Manchester United actually going to save from these? Is it going to make the impact that they say it will?
Well, we don't know is the truth. If you look at the statement that they put out at the year end, they talked about annualised savings of around 40 to 45 million pounds. But it's very hard to see how the retrenchment that they had at that stage was going to have that impact, because we know that they made approximately 250 redundant at the end of the in the summer, and we know that cost from their accounts about £8.6 million. Now, if you do the maths on that in terms of the average per head, that's around about £35,000 payment out on redundancy, which would, I think, suggest that the sort of average salary of the people that had already gone was actually quite high, probably somewhere in the order of £70,000 to £100,000. That suggests that they'd got rid of a relatively senior set of people in that first tranche. But it would still be quite a push for £8 million worth of redundancy cost to translate to an annualised £40 to £45 million. So there must be other factors within that £40 to £45 million of restructuring. And you can only assume that that includes not only the salaries of those individuals, but maybe some real estate that's being closed, some offices that are being closed, some of the costs around some of the catering that we've spoken about, all to get to a point where they're much more efficient. And then on top of that, they're clearly now announcing another 200 odd people also to be made redundant. And of course, in the definition of made redundant is that they won't be replaced. Now, that's going to shrink United's headcount to somewhere in the order of where they were 10 years ago.
The thing is, though, I mean, the clubs say we will then be in a much stronger position to invest in football success. We spoke about these free lunches getting cut, Henry. The clubs say that will save them around £1 million a year. I mean, that is 3 weeks of Casemiro's wages. Are they trying to almost pull the wool over the fans' eyes with the way they're trying to explain these cuts?
But I don't think you can pull the wool over the fans' eyes. You've only got to see the protest movements, the discussion on social media, on forums. This is not some sort of Lowry image of fans going to the match. These are many of them intelligent individuals. People like Stefan, who've got responsible jobs, who understand. I know you're more City than United, but there are a lot of intelligent United fans who will look through the numbers. There are accountants there. You've only got to look at the statement from the Manchester United Supporters Trust to see that they go into it on an emotional level, but also on a financial level. And I don't think either of them fully stack up. The issue with Manchester United is A, the Glazers, and B, the recruitment of players and recruitment of coaches, and then these huge payoffs that they've had to give coaches.
Just very briefly on that, and sorry to cut across you there, Stefan, but it's so damaging from a PR perspective, seemingly at the moment. It's obviously not going well on the pitch. Why do you think that they are persisting with these cuts at this time? Surely they've recognised that in the public eye, this is not doing them any favours.
I think if you're a multi-billionaire like Sir Jim Ratcliffe, who's climbed to the top in his profession, I'd think a few sort of journalists or a few sort of squawks from fans, I don't think that's going to worry him particularly.
Well, I think part of it is sort of not fully understanding what he's dealing with. And it's not the first time that new owners have come into a football club and been surprised by the scale of the organisation and also the profile that they have compared to where they've come from. And there's tens of examples of this over the years where that sort of shock about how you do business in the football world is different from the outside world. And a lot of people have lost a lot of money on that journey. And right now, from Ratcliffe's perspective, the investment doesn't look like it's worth what he paid. And we've seen that numerous times. But the reality for United in terms of why now is, in many ways, this is a good time to do it. If you think about the changing position on the field, you look at how people are looking at business cost on a global sense. So if you were to take some of the examples that we're seeing in the US, that we saw on Twitter, for example, where we know that Musk went in very early days in that organization and chopped huge numbers of people. And we have to remember, the sort of retrenchment we're talking about here at United is very, very substantial, because when you actually look at the numbers as to where they've come from over the last 10 years, quite a lot of the additional headcount is on the footballing side. It's a huge growth in the women's side, which is going into the numbers and turning the football side from a technical and a men's and women's side of things to about 300 people. That means that there's about 800, 900 people who are on the other side of the business, i.e. the administration, media and commercial. It is very unlikely that these chops are going to materially impact that 300 on the football side of things. There will be people around the edges, of course, but there's not a lot you can do with the actual size of the squads. So the vast majority of these cuts are going to be in the media, the commercial and the other parts of the business. That's going to chop those areas in half. That's very, very dramatic. And is that going to have an impact on the service that's provided to the media, to commercial partners and to the fans?
The commercial side has actually been successful. I mean, if you look, people talk about the London office, and I know they've moved from Mayfair. I went round that office. I mean, that was stunning. And they've moved to Knightsbridge, but they're cutting people back there. But that actually has been successful, hasn't it?
Yes, they remain one of the most successful commercial sides in the world, and that's despite, of course, the slightly disappointing performance on the pitch. If you're a United fan, which I'm not.
Slightly is
Slightly is doing a lot of work there.
Well, I tell you what, I mean, Henry, you mentioned the fans there. It's safe to say that INEOS have not been popular with them since these ruthless cuts came into play. It's led to huge questions being asked as to whether Sir Jim and co even understand what the club is about. Manchester United fan and host of Inside Devils, Flex, passionately explained the key reason why he thinks it isn't working out.
I just think INEOS are just so used to working with products. I stand by that. Sir Jim Ratcliffe's success in business hasn't been in sport, really. No. If we're being honest, it's been through petrochemicals, it's been through product, materials. But guess what? At Manchester United, the product is people. The people you are working with every day, and the people you're there to entertain and adhere to are people. And I think they're really struggling with that because they're very ruthless and come from a different background.
Henry, we know, of course, that INEOS are used to running chemical factories and industrial business, like Flex says there, and that they haven't realised that the product, as he says, is people. But have they been a bit naive, considering they do have sporting projects? They do run football clubs, they have sailing products, they have interests in so many other different sports. Have they been naive in their running of Manchester United so far?
Everything that Flex said there is absolutely spot on. I hope Sir Jim listens to that, because I'm not sure who's really advising him, whether he's got people who have got one eye on the fact that football is about the heart as well as the head. You talk about the fact that he's had sporting connections before. It didn't always go that well at Nice. It certainly hasn't all gone that well with Sir Ben Ainsley. So I think there are issues there. It's quite amusing to watch from afar, generally, how incredibly successful businessmen step into football and just make a mess of it, whether it's the advisors, whether it's hubris, whether it's ego, whether it's the dressing room door opening and they just get this whiff of the players and the sort of the success and all that, and that it actually just takes them away from what they were good at.
I mean, the interesting thing here is, and I do agree with what's been said in terms of the business is being very different. But what's interesting here is actually what Ratcliffe is doing is quite unusual in the way that most people that come into the sport overspend, overcommit, get all of that sort of dressing room excitement takes over, and they start going crazy with the checkbook. This is the opposite. Now, this is very much around, and this is where I think people, it's not going to be a great message to United fans, but this is where people just, I think, need to sort of step back and understand what they're trying to do here. This is a business strategy that is a template that's been used multiple times by them in terms of going into what they call distressed businesses that are underperforming, taking out huge amounts of cost, taking out some of that fat that's built up over many, many years of underperformance, and effectively saying, what's the minimum we need to rebuild from the base up? So who do we really need in this organization? Who is really important? And let's not forget, they do have a new chief executive who has come in, and presumably, certainly his name is on these statements, so it's all very well sort of saying, oh, it's all Ratcliffe. The reality is that they do have a new CEO who must have signed off on this as a strategy. His name is over the door from a new listing perspective as well. So he has obligations to that market. And remember, Sir Jim Ratcliffe is not even a director of Manchester United, the company. So it's not just Sir Jim Ratcliffe directing it. So this is a business strategy where they say, we have become a flabby organisation and we need to get back to basics, whether it's a football business, chemicals business, whatever. And some of that is to be respected. I mean, that is the way that you should run a good business. They need to
start with the dressing room.
Well, they are. It's not. I think they would say we're not ignoring the dressing room. We've inherited a lot of problems. You've got long-term contracts. This is not like a chemicals business where they can't deal with the wage bill in the dressing room overnight. You can't make a footballer redundant. You have a fixed-term contract that has tens of millions of pounds on it. That means that you don't have the flexibility that they have with somebody in the commercial team or somebody in the media team.
But they gave Ten Hag 200 million in the summer when everyone was expecting him to be sacked.
Sure, but they believed that the signings that they were making were for the good of the organisation going forward. I mean, ultimately, they have to make it work on the pitch. The big challenge they're going to have is that part on the pitch in terms of what they're doing on the cost there. So all of this retrenchment makes terrible headlines for them, but may well be actually a reasonable thing to do. They may well have got quite flabby in the organisation such that it needs to be reset. The challenge that they're going to have on the pitch, and what they seem to be doing, is creating a cost base. And they said this themselves in one of the pieces this morning. They've obviously briefed this, or I think they said it to the staff yesterday, that they're trying to create a cost base, assuming they're in the Europa for the next 4 years, the Europa League. And effectively, therefore, if they can get themselves into the Champions League, it's kind of all financial upside. Now, that's fine, except if you're then going to have your first team cost base at sort of Tottenham Hotspur levels, that could create you an issue in terms of being able to compete with City, Chelsea, Arsenal, Liverpool, because those teams are going to have wage bills closer to the £400 million mark, and United are going to have a wage bill, say, at 250.
Well, if we carry on with this financial picture overall, it's been over a year now since INEOS and Sir Jim Ratcliffe began their investment into Manchester United. Fair to say there's been a few bumps along the way, and the club's quarterly accounts do make for some interesting reading, starting with the sacking of Ten Hag and Dan Ashworth costing a cool £14.5 million. And despite Ratcliffe pumping almost 240 million in since joining the club, United's debt still stands at 731 million. And that's without the around 400 million that they owe to other clubs. I mean, Stefan, what do these accounts tell us about the current state of Manchester United? Is this a crisis for them financially?
I think it's a very mixed picture. So you have, on the revenue side, as Henry said, in terms of the commercial side, they continue to perform well. They've just signed a new contract with Adidas, a new contract with Snapdragon, front of shirt. So there aren't really any major areas where they're underperforming commercially. On match day, they've driven match day revenue quite aggressively recently, and this is all despite the performance on the pitch. But ultimately, they're in a hole right now because unless they can win the Europa League, they are not going to qualify for the Champions League. And we're in a situation now in the Premier League where you've got the cliff edge of relegation, but you've also got the cliff edge of non-qualification for the Champions League if you're a club like Manchester United. Same with City, same with Liverpool, same with Arsenal. That is now a £100 million hit if you fail to qualify for the Champions League.
With that in mind, obviously in the league campaign, it would be an absolute miracle if they managed to qualify for the Champions League from here. But they do have another route through the Europa League. Yeah. How crucial is it for them to win the Europa League this season, to qualify for the Champions League in terms of their financial standings?
Well, it's not essential, but clearly it would be a big help. But it's not essential because of what I said earlier and what Henry's been saying about their commercial success and the revenue.
They get more money from
generated.
Adidas if they're in the Champions League.
They will lose if they're not in the Champions League. They will immediately have a £10 million penalty from Adidas.
And that deal's worth about 90 million, is it? 90
a year, yeah. Yeah. So, but they used to have a penalty where if they had 2 consecutive seasons out of the Champions League, they would have a penalty. But now it's a clean £10 million. And if they were to be relegated, then they would have a much bigger hit. I think it's a 50% reduction if they're relegated. But So it's a split picture. You know, Manchester United's main issue remains that they're heavily indebted and they're spending too much money on non-performing assets on the field. And that will have to work its way through over time. They will have to try and get rid of Rashford and his £300,000 a week salary. They will have to try and get rid of Casemiro on his £300,000 a week salary. You know, these sorts of hits to their P&L, where they're getting nothing from these players, more or less. That's where the problems for United are. And then it's all about how they buy from then on in and what the team does on the pitch.
Henry, INEOS have made plenty of mistakes since they've come in. We've had the hiring and firing of Dan Ashworth. They backed Ten Hag and then they sacked him after that. They have made errors, but you brought it up earlier. Would you still say that Manchester United are hugely feeling the effects of the Glazer ownership more so than INEOS and their errors so far?
Totally, because they introduced the word debt to Manchester United. I mean, if you go to Old Trafford on a non-match day, it's like match days elsewhere. I mean, you just look at Stefan's been talking about the commercial revenue. I mean, that megastore is just a license to print money, and it's extraordinary. And yet still, Manchester United, since 2005, have been associated with debts, with payments in kinds, with interests being taken out of the club. I mean, how many directors at other clubs in the Premier League actually take money out? I mean, it's very, very few. So I think the Glazers model, I mean, look, they're laughing all the way to the bank. They've taken a billion out from Ratcliffe, and what they've done, however you want to call it, will probably be talked about in the Harvard Business School for years to come in terms of the profit they've made, in terms of the damage that they have left. It's huge.
I mean, not that it's going to get any easier for the club. I mean, unless the shareholders, i.e. Glazer and INEOS, want to put their hand in their pocket, there are, given that interest rates are unlikely to fall materially over the next couple of years, they have a refinancing that they need to do in relation to most of their debt. So that is likely to refinance at a higher level than they're already paying. So they're likely to get a higher hit from the interest charge going forward after that renews in 2027, unless the equity holders want to effectively pay off some of that debt. And then, of course, there's a stadium that we've talked about over and over again, and it's very hard. We've talked about it on this show. It's very hard to see how United managed to pay for a project of £1, £2, £3 billion without very, very significant additional debt. And even if it's secured on a brand new stadium, it's still going to mean that on the balance sheet of that football club overall, they will have a huge level of third-party debt. Now, so these problems are not going away. From the Glazers' perspective, actually, you wonder why they've held it since 2012, because they could have easily just stuck the money on a global index tracker and made actually a better return than they've made from Manchester United. And especially now because they can't take dividends out, given the performance of the club anyway. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, but the problems they're not going to go away tomorrow, and they're not going to go away tomorrow even after the retrenchment.
I think plenty of fans are going to want to know as well, when you look back at that statement that INEOS released and saying that, these marginal gains are going to give them football success in the future, it's clearly a squad that needs a big rebuild. Will Ruben Amorim be able to have this big war chest that he seems to be craving in the summer, or are Manchester United going to be hamstrung by PSR and their own debt problems?
Well, look, Henry will give you the footballing side of things, but from a commercial perspective, this is not geared up to spend huge amounts of money on the first team squad. I mean, that's not the plan that I see here. I mean, I think that what you're going to see as the second phase of this part is effectively a retrenchment in the first team squad. They want to remove the older players that they've got that are on those historically very big salaries. They want to reduce the cost base on a recurring basis of that first team squad down to closer to £250 million a year from where it is now, let's say 350 total wage bill within the organisation. That 250 is about where Spurs are, but is well below the other teams. So I think that's their next phase. and then from there they'll want to build back up. So I don't think there's an immediate, from a commercial side, I don't think there's an immediate plan. PSR-wise, they are right on the edge of PSR, and we know that they only managed to pass PSR for last season because of a couple of major allowances relating to COVID still, and also the payments that were made off for the strategic review. And so they're close on that. The new squad control methodology is not coming in next season, so they're still on PSR. So look, it's United's none of this stuff is going to fix the problem overnight from a commercial perspective.
They have tried to start. I mean, if you look at the signings of Patrick Dorgu and Aidan Haven, those are sort of younger, hungrier, less financially draining players. But I mean, you look at the Marcus Rashford situation, it was clear from a long way out in the middle of last year that Manchester United wanted him out. When Ruben Amorim, obviously tactically didn't feel that Rashford fitted in. Financially, it was a drain. So it obviously suited all parties that they moved Rashford on. He gets to play, he's obviously doing well at Aston Villa so far. And if they can get 30, 40 million pounds for him in the summer, as well as Stefan says, remove that financial burden of his substantial wages, although I assume that they've reduced because they're not in the Champions League, because Manchester United are smart enough to have done that.
Yeah.
Then there is some light at the end of the tunnel.
Henry, just very briefly, finally on this, just going back to the cuts, and especially the free lunches, there might be some people watching and listening to this thinking, well, hold on, I don't get free lunch at work. Is that too cynical a way to view it, given what we heard from Flex earlier about a football club being about the people rather than the products?
Well, first, how much are they going to save by giving them free fruit and actually taking the food away? And secondly, you're going to make staff at Carrington feel like second-class citizens. And I feel the players, and I know one or two of the players, have gone out of their way to help some of the staff who've been made redundant. And that just creates a tension. And football clubs are so much about morale. And if you can't put a price on having a good morale.
Now, moving on, American investment into English football just keeps on coming. After Ryan Reynolds, Rob McElhenney and Tom Brady, there's some new names in town. Cameron and Tyler Winklevoss. You might know them better as the Winklevoss twins, whose legal dispute around the invention of Facebook was dramatised in The Social Network. Well, they have a net worth of over £2 billion and have invested over £3.5 million into 8th tier side Real Bedford FC. They'll work together with cryptocurrency podcaster Peter McCormack, who's been chairman and owner of the club since 2021. And I am delighted to say that Peter joins us now. Peter, welcome to the show. I guess my first question for you really is about your journey to this point. How did you get into football ownership, and how have you ended up with such a huge investment?
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me on the show. That's a good question. I'm from Bedford, a relatively small town that's never had a team in the Football League. And so about 3 or 4 years ago, I started to look into why this might not have happened. I think we're the second largest town in the country that hasn't had a team in the Football League. So just doing a little bit of digging around, it just seems like nobody ever really had the business plan to make that a reality. So I started looking at it myself, thinking, how can we do this? Is it possible? And decided that if I was to make the club around a specific issue or a specific topic, similar to how Forest Green did with their environmental things, then that could give us like a commercial advantage, because the only barrier really to climbing up the leagues is the finances of football, obviously, what you guys have been discussing. And so we just built a commercial model. I went out to some sponsors to see if they would be interested. They were. And so I bought a 10th tier club 3 years ago. Bedford FC, we renamed them. They didn't really have any fans. So we renamed them, rebranded them, changed the badge and the logo. And yeah, we've been relatively successful, back-to-back promotions. And we're sat top of the league now. If we win our game in hand, we're 6 points clear. Our women's side, we established last year, won the treble. They are also top of their league. And obviously, we've now had the significant investment coming in. But just prior to the investment, just to say that the last 2 seasons we've done this, as a profitable club, we've actually paid tax into the treasury for the business we've built.
It's interesting you point out Forest Green there, who have that environmental side to them. You've got Wrexham, who had the Hollywood investment. But I believe with you and Bedford, it's about Bitcoin, isn't it? That's the way that you kind of want to sell this as a project.
Yeah, and there's two elements to the Bitcoin. Previously, I mean, I have a new podcast now, which is based in the UK, but previously I had the biggest show in the world covering Bitcoin. I used to travel around the world interviewing everybody, and I decided to establish ourselves as the Bitcoin Club for two reasons. Firstly, on the commercial side, I could attract international sponsors. We did a 5-year front of shirt deal with Gemini worth £500,000. It's not a bad deal for a club down in the 8th tier. And we've got a number of really good sponsors covering our men's and women's side. We also sell a lot of merch. Since we established the club 3 years ago, we've sold over £300,000 of merch, I think to over 60 countries. And so all the people around the world who are interested in the idea of Bitcoin, a lot of them have followed our club. It's quite funny, we get people almost every single game, somebody will come up and say hello, and they're on holiday from Australia or America, and they've now made Bedford one of their tourist destinations alongside Buckingham Palace, where they'll come down and watch a game. And so commercially, that's been really good for us. But the other side of it is, we live in very tough economic times. We have a government that's followed a previous Conservative government that does nothing but increase borrowing, which is debasing our currency. We've all seen the huge rises in inflation. We've seen energy prices going up now. Anybody who holds any amount of wealth, they don't keep their money in the pound because it's being debased. They tend to keep it in assets. The asset I've chosen to keep it in is Bitcoin, which is digital gold. And as the world reprices in Bitcoin, that's been a very good decision for me, both for me personally and for the club. We took our investment, whilst the deal closed last week, we actually took the financial investment earlier. And I think we're already up about £1.2 million on that investment as well. So the 3.58 is more nearer 5 million now.
We've seen so much American investment into English football recently. Why did the Winklevoss twins want to get involved in the English game?
I think for a couple of reasons. The first one is, they're investors. The money came from Winklevoss Capital, which is their family office. And I went to them with a plan and said, I think I can take a team from the bottom of the English pyramid to the top of the English pyramid, which obviously a lot of people rightly have laughed at me for. But I explained it as a plan, how we would do this, both commercially and financially, delivered back-to-back promotions, obviously down at the bottom of the pyramid, which is a lot easier. But I showed them the trajectory of, firstly, how we get into the Football League within a decade, and then following that, how we would consider trying to then go from League Two and up beyond there. So I showed them commercially how it can work. But at the same time, we are the Bitcoin Club. They are investors in Bitcoin. They own a number of Bitcoin companies. I think for them, it was just something that if they didn't do, it would have been another billionaire in Bitcoin. And they wanted to be the ones who could do it. I've known them for a number of years. And I've worked with them for a number of years, and everything I've kind of done, I've delivered on. So I think they believed in that I could do this. I think English football is exciting. I think what's happened in the US with Ted Lasso has opened this window to people. What's happened at Wrexham has opened a new window into non-league football, and so I just think it's an exciting time. And the thing is, people have looked at the investment and said, "Oh, they could have bought a whole club at a high level." But the problem is then that would come with a huge amount of investment, and how many promotions do you have ahead of you? With this, that money will last us for years, and we have kind of an exciting journey ahead of us. Hopefully, the men's and women's getting promoted again this year. We're fully budgeted to get promoted all the way to the Football League. So I think for them, it's quite an exciting thing to become part of this.
You're also in discussions to merge with Bedford Town, who I would imagine are, at the moment, a rival club. How would that merger work, and how much more success do you feel that could bring?
Yeah, it's since we've established the club, there's been kind of this tension between the two clubs. I think we're the closest two grounds in the country. We have a fence between us. If we were to get promoted this year, say, and they weren't, we'd be in the same division. And I think then it will become a kind of war of attrition between the two clubs. Obviously, our balance sheet is very healthy we've got over £6 million in our balance sheet for a team in the 8th tier is it's a lot of money. If we were to go over budget, even next season, when I'm looking at step 3, it would be £200,000-300,000. So our balance sheet gives us a kind of a long runway for what we want to achieve with football. Only one club out of the two is going to be able to do this. So I've maintained a good relationship with their chairman, John Taylor, and I just approached him recently. I said, look, between the two clubs, we have the pieces of the jigsaw that can get us into the Football League. I think it would be time to merge the clubs. So we made an offer. They've accepted it. And hopefully by the end of the season, the clubs will merge, and that will make us just a much stronger footballing outfit here in Bedford.
It's interesting you brought up the tension there, though, between you and Bedford Town. Is that to do with, the perceived idea that because of you coming in with so much money, trying to buy your way up the leagues, what is the general attitude you find at clubs at that level towards what you're trying to do?
Yeah, it's quite a funny thing. A lot of people bring up the money and they say, oh, you're just buying your way up the leagues. Our wage bill has been modest every season. We don't tend to have players that leave. And then when people start complaining about the money, what they're really complaining about is that we're better at business than them. I mean, every football club is a business. You know that as well as I do. And to be successful on the pitch, you really kind of have to be a successful business. You get outliers. Leicester was an outlier. But generally speaking, there is a correlation between position in the league and the finances. Now, if we have got healthy finances, it's because we've run a really good business and a really good operation, and we've been profitable and been able to get in the best players and the best manager. But it's also not just that; it's also culture. So I think the tension really comes from they, as a team, had a monopoly on football in the town, and then we kind of came out of nowhere, me yelling, "Yeah, I'm going to get us in the Premier League" and all that crazy stuff. But we've come in as these guys with skull and crossbones as our logo, playing death metal. In our ground, and we're just kind of like there, like annoying, noisy neighbour. So I think that created a bit of tension. I think a bit of tension came from the fact that maybe I was a little bit critical of what they were doing. Well, not so much critical of what they were doing, but the how far they could take where they were going. But look, it's a two local teams. There's always going to be a rivalry. We all know that. Since we've announced the merger, there's been a mixed response. There's some people obviously who hate the idea. There's a lot of people who aren't even associated with the two clubs who hate the idea. But actually, I went down to watch their game against Kettering the other day, and most people came up to me and said they're quite excited about it. A lot of people in the town are excited about it. So ultimately, if you want to develop men's football, women's football, and kids' football in the town, this is really good for Bedford.
Peter, I've got to ask finally, you've got American investment, significant American investment. Is there potential in the future, whether this is when you're in the Football League, whether this is, even if you're still in the lower tiers, will there be games played in America for your global fan base that you were talking about earlier?
I mean, I'm not opposed to any idea of doing what Wrexham did, which is to go out to America pre-season and player friendly. I mean, if we could get to that level, that would be great. I know there's like if we went out to maybe Nashville or Austin, we would be able to bring out a large crowd because they've got a high density of people who like Bitcoin in those locations. I mean, I'm not opposed to the idea, but look, we are a step 8 team, hopefully going into step 7. Our players are part-time. Us going and doing any kind of tour at the moment is not really on the cards. But look, you never know for the future. I'd love to do it if it commercially made sense. It was good for the club. Of course, I would do it, but right now our focus is on building, a club in Bedfordshire which can compete with a team like Luton. Because locally, all the teams have really. That's where our focus is really. Is you've got small clubs like Luton who've managed to, outperform and get into the Premier League. Obviously, they're falling back now. Our goal is to really focus on domestically and catching them and getting ahead of them.
Peter McCormack, thank you very much indeed, founder of Real Bedford. Maybe one day we will see them in the Premier League. Now, moving on, don't call us Tottenham. That's not a request from Arsenal, but from Tottenham Hotspur themselves. The club has written to broadcasters asking to only be referred to by either their full name or Spurs. It's part of a new brand identity, which is made clear Tottenham is the name of the area and not the club. Elsewhere, an array of new logos have been released commemorating the rebrand, where the word Tottenham is never seen alone. A standout line in the brand playbook reads, "In a world full of United, Cities and Rovers, there is only one Hotspur, Tottenham Hotspur." It's proven a bit of a controversial and somewhat bizarre move, prompting talkSPORT's own Stuart Pearce to describe it as Donald Trump-esque. Henry, it's brilliant that from Stuart Pearce firstly, but why do you think Tottenham have done this?
Money, copyright. I think it's possibly quite difficult to copyright Tottenham as a name. I think Liverpool found that a few years back because obviously it's an area. Whereas Spurs, I mean, maybe it appeals to an American audience as well. There's a, you know, I understand what Tottenham has said. Tottenham Hotspur, apologies, don't sue me, are saying that there's a bit more drama to it. You know, you've got Spurs. I mean, obviously, you know, there's also San Antonio Spurs. So, I mean, if you ever make the mistake of tweeting hashtag Spurs on X, you get some rather confused. Is it basketball fans, San Antonio Spurs, sort of coming and saying, "What are you on about?" So, I mean, it's what clubs do. Maybe it's an American influence, the way they're going.
Well, I mean, it does feel, doesn't it, as if it follows that US idea of moving away from geographical roots and almost selling the club as a franchise. Is that a shame for Spurs fans that they're moving away from, you know, where their club is geographically known and where its base was and has been forever?
Look, it feels very sort of marketing 101 to try and give the club some kind of brand identity around the franchise model, as you say. You know, it's all the sort of chat we hate in football. I think it's going to be very challenging for them because Tottenham Hotspur is just too long for people to, you know, if you do want to, as Henry just fell into the trap, if you do want to talk about Tottenham Hotspur, it's just a bit too long, and not everybody wants to call them Spurs. And then there's the complication of calling them Spurs from an American sport perspective. So I wonder whether it's that well thought through anyway. To try and change the way people talk about a club after 100 years, 150 years, it's not straightforward.
Is the timing a bit strange, Henry, as well, given how poor their league season has been?
Yeah, I have to say, of all the things going on at Tottenham Hotspur Football Club, apologies, this doesn't enervate me that much. I mean, people will carry on calling them Spurs, Tottenham Hotspur. I mean, Borussia Mönchengladbach is probably even more of a mouthful, and they sort of get away with that. I don't know. I mean, I've got more issues in terms of the distance between the boardroom and the fans at the moment. In fact, they're not listening to them enough. I don't know whether they actually canvass the fans to what they think of it. As you say, it's marketing 101, and they probably didn't. But I think in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't offend me that much. I mean, I'll just call them Spurs.
Yeah, well, do whatever you want, Henry.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're a licensed unto yourself. Just quickly on rebrands, though, as well, Stefan, because maybe not name-wise in the way that Tottenham are trying to force on broadcasters to change the way they're talked about, but badges, things like that's been a big change for a lot of clubs recently, usually trying to simplify the badges too. How much more success can a rebrand bring for a club?
Well, I think it gives them another opportunity to sell a whole new range of merchandise. I think we've seen some very good examples of it in terms of going back to some of those 70s logos of Leeds and the 80s one at Newcastle, actually very similar badges. It is an area that's going to get some focus in the independent football regulator. So kits, colours, badges, that is a core area actually of the regulator. And presumably will be something that they can deal with in pretty short order. But you know, I don't think it makes. Again, this is where the marketing team would get very excited. It'd be a very big launch. There'd be a lot of focus on it internally. But from a fan perspective, at the end of the day, we know it's about what's on the pitch. And you know,
some of these rebrands have failed in the past as well. Leeds themselves tried to bring out the new badge of the arm on the chest, that was taken away. Cardiff had the red kit, which they changed from being blue. So is it important, you think, Henry, that clubs do listen to fans on these kind of issues?
Do you know what? This takes us exactly back to where we started, whereas football clubs are not normal businesses. It's all about emotion. I've got a friend who changed the mascot at a lower league club, and wow, I mean, she was saying the interest in it. She just rebranded the mascot, who, to be fair, was a bit of a dusty creature who needed a little bit of modernising. The wardrobe brought into the 20th century, let alone the 21st century. And, oh, absolutely, it was almost sort of letters to the local paper, and this is outrage. And so, look, I mean, you're right, and the regulator's going to have fun protecting the badges and everything. But, yeah, mess with tradition at your peril.
Yeah, because the other point is that, as soon as stories like this crop up, they're kind of laughed at, aren't they, really? I mean, the Tottenham Hotspur idea, it seems like one where fans will look at it and think, I'm going to call it whatever I want, and I'll continue doing that. Is there a kind of ridicule around this?
Well, I think that's the flip side of the fan base. There's also the fan base of every other team. So, you have that combination. It'll be the same when Cardiff tried to change the colour of the shirt. Not only would it upset the Cardiff fans, but every other set of fans would have been laughing at the fact that they changed the colour of the shirt, because it's so ridiculous. Football is unusual. These are historic assets in these communities, and you mess with them, at your peril, and people will. I think that the regulator will stamp it out, really, because it's just not going to be worth a battle with the regulator to start doing, controversial things with the asset. But, I do think that if you look at some of the changes that have happened, if you go from, say, Manchester City's kind of mid-90s badge to the rebrand that they undertook maybe 5-6 years ago now, where they went back to a round badge, a more traditional badge, I would say that's been a huge success. So these things can work, especially if it's correcting a failure of maybe a previous regime, and we know there's plenty of those as well.
But it does create huge stories. Sorry, interrupting you. I can remember when Three Lions, the song came out, Euro '96. The FA just had someone came onto them and said, by the way, your lions, they're actually leopards. And it caused an absolute internal meltdown at the FA. I mean, forget Southgate missing a penalty. The fact that it was three leopards on a shirt, and I think subtly they got one of the designers to tweak them to make sure. I think in heraldic terms, leopards and lions. I'm not an expert, but apparently it was there was an easy crossover, but they did have to tweak the heads or the tails.
Yeah, that doesn't quite have the same ring, does it? Three leopards on a shirt. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for your time. That's it from us this week on How Football Works. If you want to get involved, post your comments below. And remember, you can also watch and listen to the show on Spotify as well. Thank you very much for your company, and thanks again to our guests, Henry Winter, Stefan Borson and Peter McCormack. See you next time.